Welcome to the show. My name is Charlton with Big C. This is Charlton and Big C Sports, coming to you worldwide on the Big C Sports Network, on the #1 network in the United States of America. And Big C Sports has been voted the #1 sports show in the universe, according to Big C and them good old boys down south. I want to say bienvenidos to all of our listeners in Latin America, also across the pond in London, England, as well as Paris, France. Of course, you good old boys in Canada. We love you in Africa, the Big C tribe. But there's no one we love more than the good old boys down south in the land of the free and the home of the brave on a beautiful January the 1st, 2020. Rondo Deportes, Big C. How's it going for you good old boys down south?
Well, Charlton, good to talk to you again. Seems like we haven't spoken since last year and, sitting around last night, Charlton, watching and listening to the new year come with a bang. I thought it was duck season as many shots as I heard fired last night.
Yeah, I don't know what it is about people that can't afford fireworks and they shoot out shotguns in the air. It never made any sense to me, Big C, but that's how good old boys get down. I want to say today's show is sponsored by your Northern California Cadillac dealers, home of the all-new Cadillac Escalade, the standard of the world. And when you go by and test drive yours, tell them Charlton and Big C sent you, as well as a fleet of Cadillac cars. Big C, I think I lost my voice last night. I was yelling so loud, telling people, stop shooting those shotguns. But it's not smart telling your neighbor don't celebrate with shotguns. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, Charlton, I think everyone was a little overzealous last night.
Yeah.
2019 seemed to be one of the quickest years ever in my life. I mean, it seemed like I went to bed and woke up and the year was over. But a lot of great things happened throughout the year, friends, family, and in entertainment. So just enjoyed the year as short as it seemed and looking forward to a prosperous 2020.
Very much so. You can follow Big C Sports powered by Google and Alexa. Just say Google or Alexa, play Big C Sports Podcast. You will hear from our national sponsors on TV and radio. You'll hear Welcome to the Show. I will introduce Big C as the Mystic, and he'll do his thing, and I really appreciate the way things are going with Big C Sports. You can also follow Big C Sports on Xfinity, Comcast Television, also on Roku TV, Apple TV, Fire TV, and a lot of smart TVs all over the universe. I want to make sure that I pay homage to our national suicide hotline for military veterans and civilians, 800-273-8255. That's 800-273-8255. Or you can text 838-255. That's 838-255. And Big C, I think we can make a dent in helping people get help. Your thoughts?
Well, Charlton, a new year has come, but an old problem still exists. And that's called suicide in this country, Charlton. It has afflicted so many of our American citizens, especially our veterans who have served admirable time in our armed forces in protecting the sovereignty of this great nation, Charlton. The National Suicide Prevention Hotline number is there to hopefully stem the tide of this horrific disease that not many Americans want to recognize or pay attention to, but is afflicting us every day in this great nation.
Yep.
So any way that we can offer or give help to our great military veterans and even our private citizens, as we think about teenagers and adolescents. And it's sad, Charlton, to think that young people with so much to look forward to in their future would take their lives through suicide, but it's happening at an alarming rate in this country. So the National Suicide Prevention Hotline number is there for people to have someone to talk to not be judged. I know a lot of times with peer pressure that's out there that has driven a lot of teens to this problem that we have in this country, Charlton, but our veterans come back and don't have the support base that they've had for years in active military duty. They're put out on the streets of America, Charlton, and told to adjust without giving proper counseling or guidance by the military. They basically turn their backs on them.
Yeah.
So the National Suicide Prevention Hotline number there, it's your friend, it's your lifeline, someone to be there for you, to help you get through this troubled time in life. So don't hesitate. And a lot of veterans and other people don't have access to cell phones.
Yeah.
So if you ever see somebody in a troubling situation and ask them, how can you help? Do they need someone to talk to? Don't hesitate in calling the National Suicide Prevention Hotline for them and passing over your phone.
That's 800-273-8255, 800-273-8255, or you can text 838-255. That's 838-255 and get some help. And I'm glad that we're a part of that solution. Because see, people always say Don't tell me about problems unless you bring a solution, and I want to say that's a solution. Big C Sports also acknowledged by iHeartRadio, one of the top podcasts on their platform, and that's in the top 1%, so really appreciate that. Big C, I want to ask you, I know we talked about last night, New Year's coming in 2020, so many things to be grateful for. Last night, I fell asleep, and I had to set the alarm to wake up so I could watch the ball drop in New York City. It's something I've been doing since I was a young boy on ABC. I think it used to be Dick Clark. Now I have other guests that show up too. And I also watch CNN. But my New Year's, I woke up so I could watch the ball drop. And after the ball dropped, then I stayed up about another 2 hours. I couldn't go to sleep. So I stayed inside after I yelled at a couple of my neighbors for shooting off shotguns. I'm like, how you shoot off a shotgun to celebrate the New Year's? And he said, mind your business. So I decided I'd listen to him, Big C. What did you do for the New Year? Your thoughts?
Well, Charlton, I sit around with some friends and family, had some wonderful libations. A friend of mine turned me on to a very nice bottle of tequila, and I had a few sips out of that. And had some family members who wanted toast with some champagne at midnight, so we cracked a couple of bottles of the bubbly. Really enjoyed ourselves with a nice light dinner, Charlton, and able to watch some fireworks and listen to a lot of gun blasts in the neighborhood. But everything was well. It was great to see another year come in, Charlton, to have your health, to be thankful for that, and have friends and family.
Yeah, it's always amazing to have, I've had my kids home, and it's just nice to be able to enjoy that and appreciate a lot of good things that happen, in the world. And we all look forward to a wonderful 2020. I even I talked to my mother last night about New Year's, and she was celebrating too, but she was in bed just like me. So the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, I guess, Big C. But I want to just get on just a few things that happen in the world of sports. I know the Rose Bowl is big today, a couple other big bowl games going on. But I also would just want to say, for all the talk about Utah being in the Final Four National Football Playoffs, and again, it's one game. It doesn't mean it would be this way the whole season. But some of the games from yesterday, it was Navy over Kansas State 23-20. In the Liberty Bowl, in the Arizona Bowl, it was Wyoming 38-17 over Georgia State. And then the Alamo Bowl, we had Texas 38-10 over Utah. Now, why can Texas win their bowl games, but they can't win the Big 12? Big C, your thoughts?
Well, Charlton, that's also a representation of the Pac-12 when you look at that. If you think about the Pac-12 runner-up over the last 9 seasons, Charlton, they've been demolished in the bowl games that they played. So they've been 0-9 in the last 9 years, the Pac-12 championship runner-up when they go into a bowl game.
Yeah.
But as you talk about college football expansion, these are the teams that you're talking about potentially being in the college football playoffs. So really, does it make sense to think about adding games to the college football playoffs? Not only that, you think about 25 potential NFL prospects have skipped these college bowl games.
Yeah.
So does that weaken the rosters for the teams that are going into the bowl game? Do teammates feel let down? But when you think about that, the 25 players have skipped bowl games thus far, getting ready for the potential NFL draft.
Yeah.
How does that help going along if you expand the college bowl system? And then if you do that, what if one or two of the quarterbacks say, hey, I'm not going to risk it. I'm going to sit out a bowl game because I'm a potential top 10 pick, and I don't want to risk my future.
Yeah, it's all about the money, though. We'll cover that in a little bit. The schools don't care about the players. They don't care about who plays or who doesn't play. Big C, that's for the fans. But the schools, and we'll touch that a little bit later, why the Bulls will expand. And there was the former commissioner from the Big Ten that was also talking about why it will expand. The Outback Bowl, Minnesota, a Big Ten team over an SEC team. Minnesota 31, Auburn 24 in the Outback Bowl. And I think about P.J. Fleck from Minnesota. They were so close to being able to win the Big Ten championship, but they had a close loss to Penn State. And then, of course, they couldn't handle the loss against Ohio State also. But still a fine season for a team that really has they're dominated by sophomores and juniors. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, when you think about Minnesota's season, they had their 11th victory to date. That's the most victories that Minnesota has had since 1904. So when you think about the rise of this program and what P.J. Fleck has done to the Golden Gophers, Charlton, and getting them to that great great stature of
Yeah.
having 11-win season,
Yeah.
and their future is bright. When
Yeah.
you look at the Big Ten, it is a power conference from top to bottom, led by Ohio State, who has many returning players, but they always have one of the top 5 recruiting classes in the country. We see how well Penn State has performed for over the last 4 or 5 seasons since coming back from that horrific situation that they had in their program a decade ago.
Yeah.
But Minnesota's there. Michigan is on the rise. They played Alabama tough today. So the Big Ten is strong. You got Wisconsin playing in the Rose Bowl tonight.
Yeah, they're playing against Oregon, too, and that game is coming up on a conclusion. And then Michigan and Alabama, that was a 35-16 win by Alabama over Michigan. Alabama, I believe they scored on their first time they touched the ball, and I think it was about a 90-yard pass, and that got them on the board. And it was a back-and-forth game. But when I want to contrast these two great coaches, Big C, for the college level, we know Nick Saban and what he's done. He's also done it for LSU, and now he's found a nice home in Alabama right there by that lake. But if you look at Harbaugh, he started strong out at Stanford, and then he got the chance to go coach the 49ers, and now he's at Michigan. I think he had as much success at Stanford as he's having at Michigan, but still, when you go up against Nick Saban, when I watched a guy by the name of Najee Harris, which was the number 1 running back for Alabama this year, he's 6'2", 230 pounds. He was Mr. California high school football from Antioch, California, just a couple of seasons ago, Big C. And plus, you get the top players from Alabama, too. It's hard for Michigan to compete with that. Your thoughts?
Well, when you look at these two coaches, Charlton, they've traveled a quite similar path. You know, when you think of Jim Harbaugh, he played at the University of Michigan,
Yeah.
and he went on to coach at San Diego State, University of San Diego. Then he moved on to Stanford.
Yeah.
Then after that, he goes
That's
to the 49ers. Then he ends up back at his alma mater, Michigan. You think about Nick Saban. He started out at Kent State as a player.
Yeah.
Had a famous Hall of Fame member on his defense, Jack Lambert. They were teammates
Yeah.
when they were in college. All Hall of Fame linebacker from the Pittsburgh Steelers. He went on to coach at LSU or Michigan State.
Yeah.
Then on to LSU, went to the NFL, to the Miami Dolphins, and we know the history that he's made at the University of Alabama. These are two powerful individuals when you think about the landscape of college football. Nick Saban, you think about having 2 losses on your season, and that's a down year.
Yeah.
That's a poor year in Alabama, 2 losses. And, I mean, look at the number of teams around the country that would love to be at 11-2 at the end of the season, and that's where Alabama was, and it didn't bode well for them. And they're a team on the rebuild, but expect them to be back and as good as ever next year.
Yeah, and I've always contended that Alabama is as good as anybody in the bowl games. The sad thing, and there are people who talk about it all the time too, the sad thing, not that it's sad, because they give you money to show up, and we'll talk about that, but they have 4 slots available for the college football playoffs, but we have 5 Power 5 conferences. So automatically, you're leaving somebody out. Imagine having 5 kids and you set the dinner table for 4. It's not a good feeling if you're that number 5. So I know they're going to have an expansion to that system, Big C. But anything in your mind, just a thought, with all the talk about NFL coaches going to be shown the door, and we're still waiting for the shoe to drop in Dallas. But do you see Nick Saban or Harbaugh wanting to go back to the NFL, or are they pretty happy where they are, Big C? Your thoughts?
Well, you know, the thing about being a top-flight college head coach, Charlton, is the grind that you don't have to deal with in the NFL.
Yeah.
You have the ultimate power. You're in the NFL. You have players who make more than you as a coach, so they wield more power than you.
Yeah.
So being on the college level, Charlton, where you're treated as a god if you're winning, you know, in college, you have a double-digit win season, you're automatically guaranteed to be in a bowl game.
Yeah.
In the NFL, if you win 9 games, you're not going to be in the playoffs generally. And there's a lot more tougher situation in the NFL because you have to deal with these grown men every play. You got to deal with everything. You're not just a coach. You have to be a CEO and you know, a public relations guy, Charlton. You have to be human resources. All of these different types of attitudes you have to manage.
Yeah.
And so being on the college level where you can say, hey, it's my way or the highway, it's like being a parent. You know, you're either going to take out the trash or you're not going to eat tonight.
Yeah.
That's how it is.
Yeah.
And that's what a college coach is. So
Yeah.
I don't see Harbaugh or Saban dying to get back to the NFL because as you hear about all the coaching moves in the carousel
Yep.
in the NFL as it's going along, You don't hear these two names come up.
You know, Urban Meyer, when he was watching the Ohio State-Clemson game, and he was kind of bent over, hands on his knees, and people were saying, doesn't he look like he's ready to go back? He may have just had some money bet on the wrong team. That's what it was. He was kind of crunched over almost in the standing-up fetal position. But that's a good point. Why would you want to leave where you're the king, you're the big fish in a small pond as opposed to a small fish in a big pond? And there are coaches like Lincoln Riley at Oklahoma. I think he's making $6 million a year. They're not going to pay you more in the NFL, Big C. Your thoughts?
The risk reward in the NFL is no greater than what it is in college.
Yeah.
And when you can make $6 million a year living in Norman, Oklahoma, which if you were sitting in New York making that kind of money, you're going to need to make at least $18 million a year.
Yeah,
but you don't have the pressure. Who is judging you out in Norman? Yes, you've lost 3 consecutive years in the college football playoffs, but you have made it to the college football playoffs.
Yeah.
So that is a plus. And so, you got to give a coach 4 to 5 years, really, to establish himself in a program. Lincoln Riley's just in his 3rd year. He really has not had a chance to put his blueprint on that Oklahoma program. You think about it, he's had 3 different quarterbacks. All of them have been transfers. Next year will be Lincoln Riley's first year with a quarterback that he recruited into the program to see where it goes from there.
Yeah, and there's so much talk about why, NFL Kitchens, where they get 1 year for the Cleveland Browns and he's out of the door. You can go to college football and lose the first 2 or 3 years and still keep your job. We've seen that happen with.
Well, it all depends on whether you're Willie Taggart or not. You think about it. Willie Taggart was gone after 1 year at Florida State. You think about Stoops down in Kentucky.
Yeah.
Bob Stoops' brother. At the University of Kentucky, he had 3 consecutive losing seasons before he had a winning season. Kentucky stood by him.
Yeah.
And now he's had 3 consecutive winning seasons at Kentucky. And we're talking about a basketball school in the SEC that no one even thought about their football program.
Yeah.
But when you think about what Stoops has done down at the University of Kentucky, after 3 losing seasons, 3 consecutive winning seasons, and last year had a double-digit season, and how quick Florida State was willing to get rid of Willie Taggart, it's unfair in a lot of situations.
Well, we know life is unfair, and it's all fair in love and war that we're juxtaposed to having things be fair. We know it's not. Color is still a big issue. Racism has been around since the Middle Ages, Big C. It's always about who you know and what your skin color is, and I just want to be real about that. But the reason, and I want to get into how beautiful it is, the Rose Bowl. In fact, the Rose Bowl parade, it's called the Rose Parade, has been around 130 years. The Rose Bowl has been around 106 years, and it's just a beautiful place. I know, and this goes back into that conversation that you and I always have. I know you're from the South. I know you guys are biased. You think your moonshine tastes better than red wine, and that's okay too, Big C. But when you look at the Rose Bowl and all the commentators on the mothership, we're talking about it today, and the late Keith Jackson talked about it too, the granddaddy of them all, everybody knows it's one of the most picturesque places in college football. If you can't recruit there, it's not because the stadium is not big enough. It's not because it's not on campus. It's just, there's something else going on in the paperback test in college football. That's just my opinion. But I want to get your thoughts on something because I want to build up to our second half. Some of the best bowls you've seen in college football, and I know you go back way to when they were starting wearing leather helmets, but give me your thoughts on some of the best settings you've seen for college football over the years. Big C, your thoughts.
Well, the Rose Bowl has always been one of those great settings, Charlton. That's the reason why they call it the granddaddy of it all.
Yeah.
When you think about today is the 106th playing of the Rose Bowl. We talked about the Canadian Football Championship where they just had the 107th Canadian Football Championship just a few months ago when we were talking about that. But for a bowl game to be around and have such luster as the Rose Bowl had, I can think back to the 1963 Rose Bowl when USC played Wisconsin and USC got out to a 42-14 lead in that game, and Wisconsin came back with 23 unanswered points and fell just short as the clock ran out. Otherwise, they would have upset USC in that game. So the Rose Bowl has always had some wonderful, wonderful games. Just a couple of short years ago in 2017, when you had USC and Penn State, and Saquon Barkley had his coming out party, along with Sam Darnold at USC, and that was a shootout that came down to the last possession of the game, Charlton. So there's been some epic games just in the Rose Bowl, as you talk about, but probably the greatest Rose Bowl of all was when Oklahoma played Georgia just 2 short years ago in the college football playoffs. Well, that game went into 2 overtimes before Georgia pulled it out against Oklahoma.
Yep, I remember that game. The first time I saw Oklahoma come out to the Rose Bowl, they had played Washington State of all teams, back in the day, a couple of decades ago, and to see that whole stadium filled up for people that came from Oklahoma, like a lot of people from the South migrated from Oklahoma to California, the Dust Bowl era back in the day. So that was amazing. And then when I look at what's also happening, because we talk about teams going out and playing other people, USC from the Pac-12 and also Alabama from the SEC, they're going to open up the season down in Texas next year, this year, to start the 2020 season, Big C. So that's SEC versus Pac-12 football. And I think it's just part of the money. That's the reason they're doing it. I know they did it back in the day with Paul Bear Bryant and John McKay, and that's when USC beat Alabama. And Bear Bryant said, I got to get me some of those. And he was talking about African-American athletes. And now the games are still big when they do that. Is it big for you guys in the South realizing that there was a time that segregation prevented us from even seeing these great athletes? Big C, your thoughts?
Well, one of the great things about the South wanting to play the West Coast, Charlton, is that you always want to open up your schedule with a cupcake game. You saw what happened the last time that Alabama played USC down there in Texas. I don't think that horse made it out of there alive. They had a big barbecue after the game, and I didn't see a white horse after that. But, this is one of those games where you travel across country in a neutral site. You got to look at Alabama. This is a program that's going to be reeling from, the lack of respect that they got this year, Charlton. They finished second in their conference in the West and the SEC. And this is a team that's on the rebuild. Nick Saban has a lot to prove. To win 10 games, 11 games for Nick Saban is not enough. It might be okay on the West Coast, but for Nick Saban, it's not enough. So they're going to come out with a lot of fire and fury, Charlton, as they did 3 years ago with Jalen Hurts as a quarterback against that USC Trojan team.
And the thing about why I say they'll expand, and we'll talk about it in the second half, is when Alabama can look as good as they are and double up, almost double up on Michigan today in that game. At the same time, they're probably good enough to be at least top 3 in the country, maybe 4. But you can't tell me they're not good enough to play for a national championship. Like the NFL, you should not have to have an undefeated record to make it to the College Bowl playoffs, but that's almost what you got to do. So that's why they have a lot of cupcake games. I also want to take the time to just acknowledge something that was so near and dear to me. My father was in the Air Force when he was growing up, and I saw the B-2 bomber fly over the Rose Bowl. It was amazing. The first time I saw that airplane, Big C, it was at Super Bowl 33 down in San Diego when Denver played Green Bay. And I remember in the broadcast booth, everybody stopped. You could see the plane, but you couldn't hear it. It was just so beautiful. And the fact that they still do it is amazing. The first female pilot for the Rose Bowl game, Nicola Polidor, she was a pilot, and the captain, Nicholas Reed, a foreman. He was an Oregon Duck back in 2005 to 2008. But isn't that amazing? And now we're talking about in 2020, the first time ever that a female pilot has flown over the Rose Bowl. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, Charlton, when you look at the advancement of female, active duty members in all our military branches, Charlton, it's been a tremendous growth of leadership and respect that they've earned. So when we think about a female being in control of one of the greatest warships we have now, Charlton, in the air, it's not new. This has just been the advancement of American society.
Yeah, it really is. And I just like the movie Hidden Figures, so many women have done so many things in the background. And I love when we talk about that because it's so important, just like the advancement of African Americans. And I think about the coaching staffs, when Barry Alvarez out of the Rose Bowl, and I think about back in the days, Rich Brooks for Oregon. I think about Ron Dayne, how he played for Wisconsin. Also, the great Dan Fouts played up at Oregon. And I think Bobby Moore at the time, Ahmad Rashad, also played for the Oregon Ducks. When you look at the history and you think about so many things that have happened for men to give them more and more opportunity, these two programs, Wisconsin and also Oregon, they're very rich in tradition, and that's also another big thing that they can come to the Rose Bowl. And ironically, there's no USC or UCLA to greet them in their own backyard. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, those programs are going to take a while to rebuild. When you think about the Rose Bowl, it's the home of the UCLA Bruins, and they would love to have a crowd that's like in the Rose Bowl today, Charlton. I don't think they had a crowd larger than 52,000 all year long in a home game at that stadium. So there's going to be a lot of rebuilding for those programs out there. And on-campus facilities would be great.
Yeah.
But when you think about Westwood and Pasadena, they're miles apart.
Yeah, they are miles apart. And thinking of something that I know you're big on, because you probably don't like running backs. I don't think you ever saw one that you didn't want to grab his face mask as a greeting. But you think about some of the career rush yard leaders in the world of the college football. We have one at the Rose Bowl tonight, Jonathan Taylor, coming into the game with 6,084 yards. But Big C, that was in 41 games. Over the time, some of the top rushers in the game, Tony Dorsett, 6,082 yards. He did that in only 43 games. I don't think Jonathan Taylor's coming back. And then the great Ricky Williams also grew up down in Southern California in the San Diego area with the Patrick Henry High School, 6,279 yards. He did that in 46 games. Ron Dayne talked about him earlier out of Wisconsin, 6,397 yards. He did that in 43 games. And then Daniel Humphrey, 6,405 yards at San Diego State. But it took him 54 games. Give me your thoughts. And I think the answer is yes. Jonathan Taylor, he's also a scholar, academic All-American. There's no need for him to keep playing college football. He needs to run to the NFL. I know when people ask him that question, he says, I'm focused on this game. But that guy has NFL talent. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, Jonathan Taylor's always had NFL talent since he's gone to the University of Wisconsin. One of the different things, Charlton, about all those running backs that you named versus Jonathan Taylor, he's only a junior at the University of Wisconsin. All of those other players, Charlton, were seniors.
Yeah.
They did it over a 4-year span. He's done it over a 3-year span. Jonathan Taylor has been the greatest running back in college football history. Even though he's not the all-time leading rusher, he's done that in just 3 short seasons at the University of Wisconsin. So you think about his status. You always look at running backs around the country and where they come from.
Yeah.
When you think about the state of New Jersey, they produced 2 of the top 5 running backs, actually 2 of the top 4 running backs in college football history, and they both have attended the University of Wisconsin. The great Ron Dayne, former Heisman Trophy winner and first-round draft pick of the New York Giants, came out of New Jersey, went on to the University of Wisconsin. When he left, he was college football's all-time leading rusher. Now you look at Jonathan Taylor, who has eclipsed that mark over 3 years, become the greatest college football running back in a 3-year span in the history of the NCAA. He has set a 3-year record that will never be touched in college football. He's also out of New Jersey.
He reminds me a lot of, and I want to get your thoughts, when I think about Herschel Walker, what Herschel Walker did, he was a similar story. He could have played it longer. He could have had more yards. But you compare those two because when I watch them run, they remind me a lot of each other. Your thoughts?
Well, when I look at Jonathan Taylor, he's a unique individual the way he runs. He reminds me more of Sean Alexander, a running back who played at the University of Alabama and also with the Seattle Seahawks in his running style. He's a very dominant player, very fluid. He's larger than what people think that he is, but he's very explosive.
Give me your feeling when we look at some of the top running backs in college football. Of course, you think Big Ten. You think of the great Archie Griffin, won 2 Heisman trophies with the Ohio State Buckeyes. Of course, there's Ron Dayne. There's so many great players. But imagine 2 of the top 4 rushers in college football history are out of the same conference, Wisconsin, which never really wins the Big Ten. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, they won the Big Ten many times. You think about when Barry Alvarez was a coach at Wisconsin. He made a couple Rose Bowl appearances and also talked about the 1963 team that took USC to task, Charlton, and had to come from behind and fell just a little bit short in that game in a 42-37 loss. So Wisconsin has had a rich history of being in the Rose Bowl and winning the Big Ten title. It's just when you think about programs out of the Big Ten, people have more of a recent tendency to think about Ohio State and Michigan. Yeah,
that's very true. And again, of course, the great Tony Dorsett went on to Super Bowl stardom with the Dallas Cowboys, and Ricky Williams hasn't had the same success with his careers in the NFL. Now I guess he was more prescient than a lot of guys and got into a different industry once he retired. But I love watching good athletes play, and I love when they ask a guy that's playing for free, do you think you're going to forego your senior season and go to the NFL? You know how much money he's making in college football? Nothing, allegedly nothing. We're going to take the Big C timeout and come right back. And when we come back, we're going to talk more about college football and why, in my opinion, that we will see an expansion of college football games in the bowl game series. We'll be back in just a moment. All right, we are back from the Big C timeout, also known as the Big C pause. You can follow Big C Sports 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on the #1 podcast network in the universe, iHeartRadio podcast. You can follow Big C Sports on Apple Podcasts. You can follow Big C Sports on Google Podcasts. You can follow Big C Sports on Speaker.com. The apps that I really love are by Google and Alexa. Just say Google or Alexa, play Big C Sports Podcast. You will hear from our sponsors. You will hear welcome to the show. I will introduce Big C as the Mystic, and he'll do his thing. And I really appreciate the way things are going with Big C Sports. Also, you can follow Big C Sports on Xfinity, Comcast Television, Roku TV, Apple TV, Fire TV, and a lot of smart TVs all over the universe. Just got to make sure you have the smart TV or the app that can download the platform, but really appreciate the growth with that. Big C, we'll get into just thoughts on the Rose Bowl. And they'll give out scores on games that are still underway. But Justin Herbert, also Jonathan Taylor, those are two guys that appear to be NFL ready. And so the Rose Bowl, love the setting, love the scene, everything about it. Sometimes I don't know who Oregon is because they look like the Army today with their dark green uniforms and their silver helmets, but I love the way they do that. Wisconsin's more traditional. I want to get into your thoughts on the nightcap when we have the All-State Sugar Bowl game. And that's going to be number 5 Georgia versus number 7 Baylor. It's SEC versus Big 12 Conference. And give me your feeling. I know, he can't really do much more to mess up his season. He's been very, very hyped, but I don't know if he's really earned it as much as he could have. It's like Taylor and Herbert. And then for Baylor, a very unknown, Brewer, he's actually been really good. With the ball down in Texas, too. Give me your feeling on what we're going to see tonight in the Sugar Bowl, Big C. Your thoughts?
Well, it's a perplexed situation. Is Georgia going to be the team that showed up last year where everyone was saying they didn't want to be there because they felt that they were edged out of the college football playoffs and didn't play up to their ability against the University of Texas, who just blew them out last year? The biggest part about Texas in that game last year was the bull going after the dog. And you knew what the outcome was going to be for Georgia at that point. When you think about Matt Rule, there's been a lot of talk of him leaving Baylor and going to the NFL as a head coach.
Yeah.
He loves Baylor. I think he's going to stay at Baylor, Charlton, and not exodus for the NFL because he's come back and he's built a program up that was in the doghouse from Briles being down there, Charlton, and all the scandals they had.
Yeah.
Baylor's a team that, they're a very good team and they're underrated. They're very physical. I think that they're going to take Georgia to task. They have a very dominating defense. Their quarterback is going to be back in this game, Brewer. And so I look for big things from Baylor in the Big 12 tonight.
Yeah, now, perception-wise, Oregon has to win the Pac. Well, they won the Pac-12. They got to win the Rose Bowl. Perception-wise, as you mentioned, the last, 9 years, the Pac-12 team that lost in the Pac-12 championship, they're like 0-9 in bowls. So Oregon has to win that game just for a reputation for the Pac-12 conference. But I want to, when we talk about, when they had this conversation that you and I have been having really since the bowl season started December 20th, well, they had it on the mothership this morning, and they were talking about right in the heart of the Rose Bowl, will we expand college football playoffs? Well, think about this. The college football playoff revenue distribution based on calculations for the 2019-2020 season and projections for potential revenue distribution from each opponent. Each conference will receive $300,000 for each of its schools. That means schools like Oregon State, schools like Washington State or at Arizona, or even schools like Rutgers, who have no business being in the Big Ten, or our programs like Indiana. They're going to get money to $300,000 for each school when the school's football program meets the NCAA's APR participation in a postseason football game. Each independent institution will receive $300,000 when its football team meets that standards. I want to bring this up and then get your thoughts. Why it will expand, and they talked about it this morning on ESPN. Each of the 10 conferences will receive a base amount for conferences that have contracts for their championships to participate in the Orange Bowl, the Rose Bowl, or Sugar Bowl, based on combined with the full academic performance. Of course, you got to be academically eligible. The pool will reach approximately $66 million for each conference. $66 million. None of that money goes to players. Please find me any conference president that wants to turn down $66 million for their schools. Your thoughts?
Well, but then what's the cutoff line as far as who qualifies for the playoffs? Is it going to be based on record? Is it going to be based on conference? I mean, because think about it. If you got 4 SEC teams that are ranked in the top 10, do all 4 of those teams make the playoffs, and you only have one Pac-12 team that's ranked in the top 10, and so you're only going to get one participant from the Pac-12? Regardless of how you look at college football expansion, it's going to be unfair because the power conferences that dominate, the SEC dominates. You see where they are. You look at the Big Ten, they dominate. You see where they are. You look at the Big 12, they dominate. So when you look at the Power 5 conferences, 3 of those Power 5 conferences, Charlton, had multiple top 10 teams. The SEC at one point had 4. The Big Ten had 3. The Pac-12 had 1. So as you look at that, as you go up and down the line, who's not going to make it in the playoffs? Is it still going to be dominated by the same conference?
And that's why it's going to expand. Even the Big Ten commissioner that's going out after a couple of decades doing it, they have to expand it. Think about this. The Orange Bowls or Sugar Bowls will receive approximately $90 million in aggregate full academic pool, plus base. Each conference will distribute as they choose. They get to choose what schools get the most amount of money. There's no way in a world that's ran by money that you're going to walk away from $90 million. Remember, this is the same NCAA that fights their athletes getting paid because they say they don't know how to distribute $90 million for the athletes that make it, Big C. But they're going to have to expand, and because they're going to go to 8, it's going to take 5 years to do it, because $90 million is a lot to walk away from. They don't care what your record is. They don't care if you're going to have kids being hurt. No president is going to walk away from $90 million and being in that pool, Big C. Your thoughts?
Well, I mean, it's fine to have 8 teams, but in this 8 teams, Charlton, you're going to obliterate the bowl series as it exists now. The bowl system will be gone. The Rose Bowl will be meaningless. The Sugar Bowl will be meaningless. The Cotton Bowl will be meaningless. The Orange Bowl will be meaningless. So what we've established as a history, and you have to look at yourself today. Here it is, New Year's Day. Was there a lot of luster going into the New Year's Day bowl games? 10 years ago, this was all you talked about were the New Year's Day 4 bowl games. You talked about getting up watching the Citrus Bowl down in Florida, moving on to the Cotton Bowl down in Texas, going out to the granddaddy of them all, the Rose Bowl that's being played now in Pasadena, closing out with the Rose Bowl down in, not the Rose Bowl, but the Orange Bowl down in Florida, and the Sugar Bowl in between. That's what you built your day around. New Year's Day, and it meant something. It would name the national champion. Everything, college football was done. Now you go into this expansive playoff system and said, okay, we're going to figure it out. How long is that playoff system going to last? Is the game going to be the following week? And what city would it be played in? And now we got a 2-week gap between the semifinals and the finals. So you play one game. So now, do you wait a week? Do you wait 2 weeks to play the next round? What will be the site of those games? Then for the finals, do you wait a week? Do you wait 2 weeks for that? What will be the site of that? So it's going to create a huge problem, because now you're telling kids, we need you to play football even longer, not get prepared for your future. So what if all of a sudden you take 4 or 5 of the top players on each one of those teams that can potentially make it to the national championship? They say, I'm not going to play anymore. I'm going to sit it out, just like in the NBA. I'm dealing with load management. I'm getting ready for my future. We've seen this over the past couple of years where players have gotten dinged up and started sitting out games. We saw that with the Bosa kid at Ohio State last year when he got hurt. He could have came back. He's like, no, I'm preparing for my future. So as you talk about the monies in college football and the players are not getting it, and they sit there and say, okay, we're going to stay on and play extra games for this university that is not paying us, where I potentially can be a first-round draft pick in the NFL, guaranteeing myself a minimum of $12 million, I'm going to sit out and get ready for that. So how is that going to affect the bowl system going along? It seems great, the expansion.
Right.
But as you say, players become more prescient and intelligent year after year.
Yeah.
And so as they look at that situation and say, no, I'm not going to risk it for my potential team to get a national championship or lose in the semifinals or the finals, where I have a guaranteed future in the NFL.
That's a very good point. And again, it's never about the players. It's about the presidents that are not going to walk away from $90 million. They're just not.
No, it does become about the players, because it's the players that are putting it on the line. And the players are more and more intelligent and salient every year when you look at them. They're not the dumb jocks that everybody grew up with in the 60s and 70s and having that label on them. These players live through social media, so they are aware of all the finances that's going on. And as the NCAA is talking about paying players, as has been passed in some state legislators, Charlton, if the money is expanded in college football playoffs, now you're going to have to pay these players in the playoffs. You're talking about 5 years down the road. The financial part of players being compensated in college will be enacted by then. So the players are going to sit back. So what if the players all of a sudden say, we're going to go on strike? You're expanding the college football playoff system. We're going to go on strike until you pay us X amount of dollars. That's a monkey wrench that nobody was prepared for when Division I AA started the college football playoffs back in the late 70s.
Yeah.
But now with the college football playoffs going on, and state legislators, and it's going to be national by the time if you talk about expanding the college football, if it expands, it's going to be full pay scale for the players come that time. The players will be demanding X amount of those millions of dollars that's being levied out. Otherwise, they will not play. I can guarantee you that much.
Yeah, and I agree with that idea, but they don't care. That's just my opinion. By hearing the people talk about the money, they never, in all these conversations, they never talked about how it affects players, CTE, people being broken up or bruised. There was a guy that played for Notre Dame, plays for the Dallas Cowboys now, a great linebacker, but he tore up his knee in a game against, I believe they were playing against Ohio State, I believe. And now he came back and rehabbed. But the matter has never been about the players. It just never has. And I know that everybody has an opinion of that, even if players.
But with the money coming into play,
yeah.
And wherever there's money in athletics, there's a thing called a union, all right?
Yeah.
So the players will have a union. Every college athlete will have a union by that time. I don't care whether it's women's basketball, college hockey, college baseball, water polo, swimming, tennis. There will be an athletic union for the players when there's compensation involved, because there has to be somebody there to negotiate the amount of money that these players get.
Yeah.
And I guarantee you, if they expand college football, and it will be after the NCAA and the national government says that players have to be compensated for playing college athletics, these players will go on strike. And so what we know as a college football playoff and a bowl system will come to a halt.
Well, they may go on strike if they're pro players, but if the players strike, they'll probably lose a scholarship. And you know players are not going to go on strike if they have nowhere to go. A lot of people.
But if they, that's what we have the transfer portal for.
Yeah.
Players can transfer anytime they want to any school. All they got to do is say, hey, I no longer want to be here. But when there's money involved, we've seen everything that occurs with money. We know that gambling is national.
Oh, yeah.
And so as players, like I said, they're more intelligent than what you want to give them credit for. If the schools can sit there and negotiate bigger paychecks, the players will have a union. That's something they don't have now. But if the players are being compensated, that is a federal law. If you're an organization, you're allowed to unionize.
Yeah.
And I guarantee you that college athletes will become unionized, and they will have negotiators at the table whenever some broadcast network is sitting there with some conference or the NCAA negotiating how much money they're going to be paid, just as well as they're negotiating with the coaches. That the players will have a representation at the table.
Yeah.
And their compensation is going to have to be drawn out of that, or their representatives will just strike. So think about it. If all the college football players stroke in the, 42, 47 bowl games, if all the players unanimously said, we're going on strike, what would that have done to broadcast television?
Well, that's a very Good thought, Big C. And imagine, I want to add on to that. What if the Rose Bowl players said we're going to strike because we're not getting paid? We know there's tens of millions of dollars being poured into the presidents that sit around and drink the champagne and they eat the caviar, and they say, good job, boy, great game. And what if the players decide they're going to strike right now? Could you imagine if the college football national championship game between LSU and Clemson, and the players that read and they listen to Big C Sports, they say, wait a minute, why am I going to play this game? I'm not playing unless you pay me. Imagine what would happen to those players. You know, very few would get a chance to play pro ball anyway. I mean, we know that. That's like 1%.
But Charlton, I was around twice when the NFL went on strike.
Yeah.
I was playing football during those days, okay?
Yeah.
We decided, okay, went on strike. Why? Because of money.
Yeah.
We wasn't striking because one player was making more than the other player. Went on strike because the networks were paying the league and the owners, which is just what's going on now. The players went on strike. What did the league do? They had to go out and find scab players to bring in to play.
Yeah.
That's what the league did during those times because there were an abundance of players sitting around. Colleges don't have that luxury. You can't go out there and say, hey, we're going to grab these high school players and bring them in. Are we going to use these players whose eligibility is gone? Oh, maybe we can go down to 1AA or Division III and bring those players in and let them play in behalf of us.
Right.
But I guarantee you, when money's involved, you're going to have a union. You can't sit there and let the student body president decide, okay, this is how much money the players are going to get. You can't let each individual athletic director decide this is how much money they're going to get. They're going to have a national union. This is the thing that no one's talked about. They've talked about players getting paid. But if players are going to get paid, you have to have a negotiator, just like when we talked about baseball and Bryce Harper and Scott Boras getting him $330 million, getting Mike Trout $420 million. Scott Boras has 30% of the highest paid players in Major League Baseball.
Yeah.
You think that they're not going to go out and find some super agents, Charlton, or agency to represent these players on the college sports level and say, no, we're not going to play until this type of compensation is doled out on the players?
Well, I understand the NFL, but the NFL guys, they were being paid before they went on strike, Big C. These college kids get nothing. So if they decided to strike...
But once the money comes in, who has the power at that point? When you start compensating players and they go unilaterally across the board and they say, we're not going to play, whether it's basketball, baseball, football, track and field, swimming, hockey, whatever college sports it is, you think that doesn't shut down the landscape of college football? Just like I said, if everybody decided to go on strike on New Year's Day, say we're not playing a New Year's bowl game, what would be the backlash against those players? You can't take their scholarships away, Charlton, because you've allowed them to be at-work employees.
Yeah, that's the point. It could happen now, but the players have nowhere to go from it. You know.
What I'm talking about in the future is you're talking about college football expansion.
Yeah.
I'm talking about at that same time players will be being compensated. It's already in place in Florida and in California. The state governors have signed bills into place for those players to be compensated.
Yeah.
So as these bowl games, the Rose Bowl would fall under that rule. Even though there's not a California team in there, it would fall under California legislation that those players have to be paid. It's just like when the NBA and the NHL and Major League Baseball, when they cross borders, when American teams go up to Canada and play, they have to be paid in Canadian money, and vice versa. When those teams come down from Canada and play, they have to be paid in American money. So there's a large scale that you have to slide with as far as compensation. Huge adjustments have to be made in players' contracts. It's going to be inevitable in college football. It's going to be inevitable in the March Madness basketball tournament. That players are going to have to be compensated on a sliding scale. Say if they went on strike during March Madness in basketball. Think about what that would do. And you're going to say, well, all the players are not going to be able to play in the NBA, just like all the players are not going to be played in the NFL. How much money does it cost the university? Not the players, the university. Because you cannot take away a player's scholarship as long as he's academically eligible.
So at this point in time, I mean, because what we're saying, it could happen now. players can say, I'm not going to play. And a lot of players, as you mentioned, they have done that.
25 of them have already said, I'm not going to play.
Right.
And the university could not take away their scholarship because they refused to participate in the bowl game.
And I would argue that the players that have said that, Big C, they already know they're going to play at the next level. I don't think you could find a guy that's not, he's on the borderline. He's not going to strike. He's going to say, I'll line up. And you know, if every player in college football has a backup, that backup is probably not going to play pro. If they get a chance that the first team guys strike, they would still show up because the checks still would not bounce and the games would still go on. I think what you're saying is right, but it's only going to affect the elite players. It's not going to affect those guys that would play in that game because they want that opportunity. But I love the fact that we're having that conversation because we've been doing it for a long time, and now here mainstream getting it. They talked about it at the Rose Bowl today. They had the former president from the Big Ten having the conversation as to why they will expand, but they never talk about giving the money to these athletes, for the most part, African American. They're going to have that conversation. I'm glad that Big C Sports is a part of that. But let me ask you this question, too. Because if the African American players went on strike, we know they can't get jobs. You know, Willie Taggart he got fired before the end of the year down at Florida State. That was not fair. They have white coaches all over this country. They can go winless for 2 or 3 years, and they still keep a job. They give them a chance to build a program. So we haven't had black coaches strike because they would just be replaced anyway. And if the black players walked away from college football because of what we're saying, it would bankrupt, I won't say bankrupt the business. They would just fill it in with more players. But they won't do it because they have nowhere to go now. They have no power, Big C. That make any sense?
Well, they have power, and that's the point that you're missing. The players have the ultimate power, just like in the NFL when it was struck in 83 and 87 when players went on strike. They had the ultimate power. Yeah. Who owned the team? The owners, just like in football, in college sports, the universities own the team. But the players put a financial hit on the owners. When you have star athletes, and I don't care what level of sports you're playing in, the fans come to see the star athletes. Yeah. That's why when you had the scab players, the fans didn't show up in droves for the scab players, just like you see. Well, let me call them replacement players. Let me not call them scabs because they were individuals.
Right.
And as you talk about, yes, they're back up their second and third string players on college football teams and basketball teams, but there's a reason why they're second and third team.
Yeah.
Because they cannot carry the load. And will they have the excitement to draw people in? You look at LSU. Does anybody know who LSU's third-string quarterback is? No, they don't. They know who Joe Burrow is.
Yeah.
Does anybody know who Clemson's third-string quarterback is? No, they know who Trevor Lawrence is. And even Travis Etienne, their top running back, everybody knows who he is. They don't know who the third-string running back is. He could be just as capable. But as we look at the stars who created the grand stage on all sports that we watch on television, when you tuned in the Rose Bowl tonight, you mentioned two names. You talked about Jonathan Taylor for Wisconsin and Justin Herbert for Oregon.
Yeah.
If those two players weren't in the lineup, would that game have as much appeal as anybody would be expecting? Because those are two potential number one draft picks in the NFL.
Yeah.
I know Oregon has a backup and a third-string quarterback, just as well as Wisconsin has a backup and a third-string running back. But do they have the fan appeal and the television draw that those two starters have?
No, they don't, because, and again, they're not pushed every year, but I still say they have no power. That's why you said that I think 25 players sit out. Did the games get played? Yes, and that will be the case going forward. Just because you sit out doesn't mean the game's going to stop. It would take a mass sit out to do that. But I love that conversation.
That's what I was meaning by saying strike.
Yeah.
If these teams, trust me, teams have team meetings.
Yeah.
And when they stand by one, they stand by all. If they say as a collective group, and trust me, once the money comes into play with it by the year 2022, I believe it is, or 23, when the players will be being paid across the board in college athletics, when the players feel that the compensation is not enough, just like in any union job, the NCAA is a union. It is a non-paid union right now.
Yep.
But in 3 years, it will be a paid union. And once that union is enacted, you have rights. And you have negotiation rights.
Yep.
And in those negotiation rights, players say, we're not going to participate until the compensation is greater.
Yep.
And I guarantee you, by the year 2025, there will be a strike in college athletics because the players are not being compensated enough once they started getting compensated legally.
Yeah, and I agree. And the key word is a union. They're not a union right now, but when it happens, we'll have to see. I love the conversation. Everything happens with the conversation. You can follow Big C Sports 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on the #1 podcast network in the universe, iHeartRadio podcast. You follow Big C Sports on Apple Podcasts. You can follow Big C Sports on Google Podcasts. You can follow Big C Sports on Spreaker.com. The apps that I really love are by Google and Alexa. Just say Google or Alexa, play Big C Sports Podcast. You will hear from our sponsors. You will hear welcome to the show. I will introduce Big C as the Mystic, and he'll do his thing. And I really appreciate the way things are going with Big C Sports. You can also follow Big C Sports on Xfinity, Comcast Television, launching on Roku TV, Apple TV, Fire TV, and a lot of smart TVs all over the universe. I know we're in a great Happy New Year, Big C. In the final few minutes, I just want to say, some people say our condolences are with the family of the late David Stern, and of course they are with the family and all the people that mourn his passing. The commissioner passed away 77 years old, and the NBA is partly great because of his expansion. Before I talk about David Stern and get your thoughts, I want to just mention tonight's schedule. Orlando Magic at the Washington Wizards, Portland Trail Blazers at the New York Knicks, Minnesota Timberwolves at the Milwaukee Bucks, and the Phoenix Suns at the LA Lakers. But David Stern, I remember when the NBA at one time, and you probably call it too, Big C, it was like an all-white league for the most part, and the integration changed a lot of things. And without integration, we wouldn't have, I think, one of the most dominant leagues anyway. I know NFL is king, but this man opened up so many doors for African Americans. I think it was his help with Isaiah Thomas is the reason we have basketball in Canada, expanding up the Toronto Raptors, also up in the Vancouver Grizzlies before they moved down to Memphis. Well, David Stern is also the reason that the Sacramento Kings stayed in Sacramento. He worked with former Mayor Kevin Johnson and helped use his power to keep the Kings in Sacramento. I know he kind of walked away from the Seattle Sonics, the Supersonics. There were some issues going on with people, so he walked away, let them handle it his own. He could have put his fist down and kept the Seattle Supersonics in Seattle, but he let people argue and do what they want to do, so they left. Give me your thought about what David Stern has meant to the NBA. There's more African-American broadcasters in the NBA. There's more African-American coaches now in the NBA. And it's not all because of Silver. David Stern laid that foundation, Big C. Your thoughts?
Well, David Stern did do a lot as far as the growth of the NBA. He came in on the heels of Larry O'Brien, who was more like a Pete Rozelle in the NBA and the NFL, where he brought the league together through expansion. He brought in the 4 teams from the ABA, Larry O'Brien did. But when you think about David Stern, he learned from that, and he was able to unify the league even more. He brought in minorities. He got women involvement, not only just in management, but as well as in officiating. Dalton. He made minorities a common thing in the NBA. But one of the parts of his legacy is that, people look at, even as much as he did as far as expanding minority participation, is that he left 4 cities without NBA teams. He allowed the movement from 4 cities, Charlton, which left those cities without fans, and I don't know if those cities will ever recover from that. So you can always talk about the greatness of what a man exudes and what he does, but you also have a negative part of a legacy that exists, and that's when you leave people behind.
Yeah, and that's what happens when people negotiate, and sometimes it's about ego and money, and it's always that fine balance before you go forward. Big C, I'm so happy with what we're doing with Big C Sports. I'm happy for the new year. I'm happy that people can stay healthy, wealthy, and wise, that people can keep dreaming and keep fighting for what they want, and no matter how challenging things are, part of success is just showing up. Don't worry about the people who are not on your side. They won't be on your side even when you cross the finish line, but just keep fighting. I hope that everybody will have a fabulous 2020. I think there's so many great things coming forward for everybody in this great country. We have an election year coming up. I hope that people go out and vote. I hope that people will go out and keep watching and following Big C Sports. I really appreciate the things that we've been able to do from 3,000 miles away, and it's always inspiring to me. Big C, back in the day, there was a man by the name of Drew Boudini Brown. He was known as Muhammad Ali's right-hand man, and he would always tell Ali, with all you got to use, how can you lose? Rumble, young man rumble, Big C. What are you looking forward to in the sports universe?
Well, Charlton, an exciting way to start out the New Year's with some exciting bowl games, but I'm going to be able to go to bed early tonight. I don't have to stay up and wait for the New Year's tonight.
Yeah, well, you don't have to stay up and wait, but I'm sure we'll all stay up for something, Big C. Hopefully it tastes good and it feels good. You can always feel good, too, every Monday through Friday at 5 and 6 p.m. worldwide, where you follow Big C Sports on the Big C Sports Network, on the #1 network in the United States of America. And Big C Sports has been voted the #1 sports show in the universe, according to Big C and them little boys down south. As we always tell you, there's never, ever an excuse for domestic violence. If you know any man or woman going through that garbage, please pick up the phone and call 911, because no man or woman should ever have to go through that garbage on their own. And as we always tell you on every Big C Sports show, we thank you, we appreciate you, and we hope that you have a super fantastic day.